ready to get started. I want to thank everybody who's joining online this afternoon and also here in person at Child Trends. We're delighted to have Miriam Navot here with us today. She's the director of the Engelberg Center for Children and Youth at the Myers-JDC-Brookdale Institute in Israel. And she is going to be talking with us about an initiative to improve the quality of early childhood education in the Arab sector in Israel. And we're delighted to have her with us today. Just so we all know, this webinar is being recorded. And those of you who are online, you are in listen-only mode, but we will have a chance to hear your questions and answer your questions after Miriam speaks. After she speaks, I've been asked to give a few reflective comments, which I'll do briefly, and then we'll open it up for a group discussion. So we are delighted, Miriam, that you're here, and please share with us your research.
Okay. So thank you, Tamara, and thank you everybody who's here to listen and to participate in this discussion. I'm very happy to be able to present the initiative here today, and also especially happy to be here at Child Trends, for whom we in Israel have great admiration. So thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to begin with a very brief introduction of who we are at MJB, and then talk about the context of Arab preschool education in Israel, and then I'll move on to discussing the initiative, a description of the program, the study, and some of our initial findings from this very first month. So Myers-JDC-Brookdale Institute is an institute of social policy and social services. It was founded in 1974 as a collaboration between the government of Israel and the JDC, which is a large American Jewish philanthropy. And the idea was to do that research, which would help society and the public services do a much better job for its vulnerable population and its vulnerable individuals. As you can see on the screen, we began with aging and since have added a number of divisions. The Engelberg Center, which I had, was set up in 1995. And just to give you a taste of what we do at the Engelberg Center, we have quite a broad research agenda with research dealing with many areas of issues affecting children and youth at risk, beginning with the child welfare system and the needs of children for protection, to issues of youth in high-risk situations and juvenile offenders issues, families and children in crisis, including children of high-conflict divorce, the educational system, beginning with preschool and going all the way up through higher education, and we also have a number of research projects in the area of early childhood. So we're really trying to give a vast spectrum of addressing research needs relating to children and youth and their families. Oh, sorry. Okay, so today I'm going to speak about a discussion of this initiative to improve preschool education for Arab society, and I'll begin with a very brief introduction about Arab society in order to give the context for the initiative. The Arab population is Israel's largest minority group. It has its own unique language, Arabic, which is also an official language in Israel. It has its own culture, religions, and calendar. This here is a map of Israel, the white part. You see the southern is put off in the corner, but basically the southern area is mostly just desert. And if you look at the larger map on the right, you see a map of Israel. It's important for me to note that I will be speaking here about Israeli society, about Israeli citizens, Arabs who are Israeli citizens, and not Arabs who are citizens of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Gaza. The Arabs in Israel are concentrated in several areas, as you can see by the green sections, mostly in the north, somewhat in the middle, and then there's a larger group again down south. The Arab minority is also not just one group. It's actually quite differentiated. Most people are Muslims, but there's also a pretty sizable Druze population, which has its own religion, and Christians as well, who tend to be quite well educated. Again, different religion and different culture, but all speaking Arabic. Then there's also a sizable Bedouin community, mainly in the south. The Bedouins, until about 60 years ago, were all nomadic, roaming around without permanent housing. Now, about half of them do live in towns with permanent housing, and about half of them are still living the nomadic life out in different villages and outside of the towns. I could say also that the Bedouin are specifically, are especially traditional, even more than the other groups. So the first thing I think is very important to note is that Arab society is a very traditional society with a strong emphasis on collectivist values, strong emphasis on the family and the extended family. Families tend to be large, and about half of the women do not work outside of the home. But it's also a society in the midst of very rapid social change. Over the last couple of generations, it seems that this keeps getting faster and faster. There's quite a lot of changing norms as the society moves from the more traditional collectivist society to a more Western society. This has been especially rapid for Israeli Arabs who have, with their close contacts between the Arab society and Jewish society in Israel, of course reinforced by TV, the media, the internet. Overall, now today, far fewer people live in rural communities, and many more people live in urban communities, though some of these urban communities are still relatively small, even the cities. But in the context of this change, the level of education of both men and women has risen radically, especially for women. Up until about 30 years ago, many Arab girls did not finish high school because they had already gotten engaged, and this happens now only very rarely. There's also been dramatic change in fertility rates over the last just 15 years. The average number of children for women went down from 4.7 to 3 in just 15 years, which is 3 is very similar to the Jewish fertility rate in Israel. And these are just some of the expressions of the profound cultural change that is taking place. So while every society feels irked by a generation gap, for Arab society, I think we can safely assume that this is really a very, very real thing, very difficult. People talk about it a lot, professionals and at various interchanges. Some of the things that come up, for instance, is like, how should we continue to expect very different things from girls and boys? Is it okay for girls to be going out at night or to be leaving the home alone? Things which weren't happening before but are happening now more and more. How do we respond when our children question our values? Okay, is this just being disrespectful, or is it appropriate to discuss things with them? Is it okay to move away from our husband's family? Okay, because until recently and even now, most families will live with the extended family. So families are dealing with a lot of issues, and this will all, as you'll see, comes into play in the educational system. Another important thing to say about Arab society in Israel is that there's a lot of poverty. Children, about 2/3 of the children in Arab society are living in families under the poverty line. This is a result of the large family size, the lower rates of employment, especially of women, and lower wages in general, because the poverty rate is calculated by the income per person. And there is poverty, and the high poverty rates are a major factor affecting children's opportunities, educational achievements, and other things, as you'll see. So now, moving pretty quickly, this is just a real zooming introduction to context, Arab education. So with the establishment of the State of Israel, the Arab population was granted cultural autonomy, which means that the publicly funded educational system for Arab children is based on Arabic. It's taught, everything is taught and spoken in Arabic, and it's culturally adapted in terms of holidays, in terms of the calendar, in terms of culturally adapted curriculum, what is studied in literature, etc. It's culturally adapted, but state funded and state supervised. The supervisors for the Ministry of Education are Arab professionals. Okay. And then there are some challenges really for Arab education. One big one is diglossia. This is a challenge all over the Arab world, and it means that there's a distinction between written and spoken language. It's especially a challenge in early education, which we're discussing today, because it means that children don't necessarily recognize the words that they're reading because they're in written Arabic, so they're unfamiliar, and they can't necessarily write what they're speaking because, again, they need to write in written Arabic and not in spoken Arabic. So this is something which is dealt with, but it's also a challenge. And another challenge is for Arab Israelis, they need to learn both Hebrew and English. They need to have a second and a third language, which are taught from early on. The Hebrew is especially important because the labor market and much of higher education, although not all, is conducted in Hebrew, so it's important for them in moving on in the labor market, etc. The English is important for Arab Israelis and for Jewish Israelis in terms of moving on again in the labor market and higher education, but the Internet, I think, is doing a good job at bringing everyone up on that. So what are a little bit just about indicators of Arab education? So one of our main indicators is the issue of school completion, to what extent are 18-year-olds finishing school. And so here you see that, that today in 2013-14, that's the latest data, 94% of the Jewish students and 88% of the Arab students are actually in school for the full 12 years up to 12th grade. These are very high retention rates. I think Israel is quite proud of it. There is still a gap between the Jewish and the Arab, but as you can see on the slide, it's gone up tremendously. In other words, in 1996, the Jewish rates were pretty much there, whereas among Arab students, a third were still dropping out, and now that issue has been closed. It didn't just happen. There was a really big concerted effort on the part of the Ministry of Education to provide a lot of incentives to schools to keep the kids in school. Basically, that's what happened. Plus cultural changes, as I spoke about. The girls are staying in school, they're not getting married before they're 18, and the boys are seeing the value of staying in school in order to move on to more higher education and job training. So all of these reasons together, we have at this point very high school retention rates. But we still have gaps in terms of school achievements. So this slide is a slide showing matriculation certificates. Matriculation in Israel, it's a test that kids take at the end of high school. So it basically shows the level of their achievements, but it's also it has real value in the world because this is what you need in order to go on to higher education. So it's a very strong indicator. And so as you can see from this graph, presently 71% of the Jewish kids are getting matriculation exams. Certificates still quite far from where we would want it to be, but even less for the Arab students, 46%. So there's a sizable gap. And even though these rates have gone up over the years, you can see for both of the groups, they've almost doubled. Well, for the Arab students, actually more than doubled, and for the Jewish students, slightly less than doubled. There is this gap which has been retained, and we're finding a hard time at breaking. In other words, there's a big challenge to raise achievements for Arab students in the schools. Today we're talking about early education, so we don't have any data like this for preschoolers. The earliest data we have is for second graders. So just to bring you there a piece of data, so we know there that 92% of the Jewish students are passing the basic literacy test, which is given in second grade, as compared to 73% of the Arab children. So there's a gap there. It's not as big as these gaps, but we see gaps all through the school system. And then the other bit of context that I wanted to bring to you today before I talk about the initiative is about early education. So early education in Israel also has a big emphasis on access, and today preschools for age 3 to 5 or through kindergarten are state-funded and universal. This was not always the case. It was actually only in 2012 that there's been full access for age 3. It's, I think, kind of an interesting story how that happened. Until then, there was state, 5-year-olds was free, 4-year-olds in some places, but 3-year-olds weren't. And so we had big gaps in access of different groups where the children in the poorer communities where the mothers either didn't work or couldn't afford preschool weren't going to preschool. And in 2012, there were a lot of demonstrations in Israel about the price of living, and a very high-profile committee was set up, public and government, and they had a lot of recommendations on how to help with the high cost of living for mainly middle class, but young couples and all. In the end, almost nothing was accepted, but there was a recommendation to make preschool free and universal from age 3. And the Ministry of Education just took it and just really ran it through. So basically overnight, over the summer, it was hundreds of classes were made available. Yeah, because, and they were made available. And this had a special impact for the Arab community, where the rate of preschool education, 3-year-old education free, went up from something like 50% to 81%, still not 100%, because especially in the South, where the Bedouin, not all of them are living in communities, there still is a lack of classes, but it's there as policy, and every year we're seeing more and more children going into preschool. So while access, I think you would agree, we're doing well in Israel, both at the high end of the finishing high school and also at the lower end of the preschool, there are a lot of concerns about quality, concerns about class sizes, which are very large, considered large, and also about staff-child ratios, too many children with too few staff people. I should say another new initiative reform that was done this year was that if until now we had a qualified preschool teacher and an assistant, there are now 2 assistants for every preschool teacher, which is good, but again, challenges still remain. So having moved very quickly through some context, now I would like to speak to you about the initiative to improve the quality of childhood education. It's a collaboration of the Ministry of Education, which is very, very involved, JDC Israel-Ashalim, which is an organization which develops services for vulnerable populations, and the Bernard van Leer Foundation, which is also a very large philanthropy working around the world, especially in the area of early childhood. And the main goals of the initiative are to affect a really significant change in all aspects of early childhood education, to do something very comprehensive, to be a game changer. Because there is recognition that for things to be implemented well and over time, you need a strong municipal support. And I'll say this parenthetically, even though the responsibility of the education is with the central government, it is known that the municipalities can also have a big contribution. So a second goal is to create strong and sustainable local infrastructures. And the third goal was to develop a national strategy where the pilot being done now in 11 communities would then be able to be expanded to all of the Arab sector and possibly all of the preschools in Israel. So we're also seeing this as a real better site of how we can improve education in a meaningful way. I thought the best way to explain the program would be through a logic model. And so basically, in brief, what we're talking about is the program putting forth resources, which are funds and expertise, and program staff, which includes coordinators, coaches, trainers, curriculum developers, who are then providing physical renovations and equipment for the preschools. Many of the preschools were very poor. We're talking about poor people living in poor communities, and many of them were not in good shape. So this was considered a first priority. But also creating high-quality curriculum materials in Arabic and culturally adapted, providing training and coaching to the preschool teachers. This is a major, major focus. Working with activities for parents, which would bring parents into the preschools, and also setting up local, regional, and national steering committees. These outputs are meant to create highly improved work in the preschools by the preschool teachers, with a big emphasis on interactions teaching, but also on interactions between the preschool teacher and the children and the parents and the staff of the preschool as a whole. Stronger local infrastructures, greater parent involvement, and with the final outcomes, of course, being greater child readiness for school, giving children a much better start as they enter the school system, parents who are better equipped to support their children, and sustainable municipal infrastructures. Okay, so we at MJB received the contract to do the evaluation, and we're doing it as a collaboration of our institute along with Child Trends with Tamara Halley who's on board, and other Israeli academics from Haifa University and other universities. It's being done as a 5-year multi-method research project, and our goals are basically to assess the implementation as the basis for ongoing program development and improvement, and to study the program outcomes as the basis for deciding whether this should continue, and especially as the basis for deciding whether this endeavor really should be scaled up and implemented all over the country. Moreover, we also want to decide whether the program has the potential for really affecting the meaningful change that is being expected. So from the start, we've been very aware of the complex nature of this initiative, the complex nature of the context. So I would say there are 2 goals that will really guide us throughout the program. One is working in very close collaboration with everyone in the field at all the different levels and all the communities, and it's quite time intensive, but it's certainly rewarding. And the second aspect, which affects our research and its design and everything we do, is the whole issue of cultural sensitivity. Because as you can hear, I'm not Arabic myself. Some of our staff is, some isn't, but we are very much aware of as the program is, in making the program as culturally sensitive as possible, so too the evaluation has to be there. So the evaluation study is being done over 5 years, and here just briefly you can see that every year we'll be checking the program implementation, mainly through qualitative instruments of interviews and focus groups. We will be looking at the quality of work in the preschools through the class instrument for observing preschool teachers' work. It's a structured instrument with a lot of emphasis on interaction and other issues that are of interest to us. We will be looking at child functioning through teacher reports during the 1st, 4th, and 5th years, and also looking at parent engagement through the teachers and also through interviews with parents. There's some challenges to evaluation research in Israel that we just wanted to mention. That, for one thing, we have no mandated information system, so we have to generate the data ourselves. We don't have administrative data. We also didn't have any standardized tools, so that was another issue. And all of the whole study has to be done within very limited resources. We're talking about very different funds than what you would generally be spending on evaluating a program of this sort here in the United States. Okay, so the program really just began, as did the evaluation, but since I'm here visiting in Child Trends, and we have already given some feedback, I'll just share some of what we're hearing. So if we talk to the professionals in the field, and the professionals, I'm talking about the head of the education department, the people who are working in the education department, the preschool teachers, the supervisors from the Ministry of Education who are working with the preschool teachers, other community services. These are some of the things we're hearing. And we're hearing that there's a great deal of, I guess you'd say, enthusiasm for the program. It's seen as a strong program because it's comprehensive. As this person said, there always were programs in the preschools, but this one is different. It's a leap forward in every respect, because it's looking at how the preschool teachers look at education and cooperation, and the teaching assistant and the parents and the municipality. In other words, not just taking little pieces, but really trying to look at the whole picture. There's also a lot of enthusiasm about the fact that it's multi-year, because too often programs come in for 1 or 2 or 3 years, which isn't really enough to get things done. It's enough to get things rolling, to get expectations raised, but often not time enough to work things through. So 5 years is probably not enough time, but at least it's enough time to do everything that they want to do, but at least it's time to make some serious ground. And the third thing is the focus on quality, because this is really quite prominent. That people say that for instance, that the curriculum which is being created is high-quality curriculum. That, like as one person said, until now what happens is that the preschool has her own material, and no one knows what she brings and what she does in preschool. So by developing these new learning kits, we are more confident that the teachers are doing things that we know are good practice. The idea of really being able to bring in good practice and to know that it's happening. The perception of high quality is especially prominent regarding the whole issue of renovations. Yeah. So the program began with doing renovations of the preschool yards, sometimes in the buildings, bringing in a lot of equipment, and it attracted a lot of attention in the neighborhood. As this person says, we felt the change. Parents were very involved and contributed a lot. They came and helped, became a real community activity. It's also very visible, and we've seen this in other programs, that to come in and do something that's very visible creates a buzz. So people see something's happening, people start talking about it, people want to be engaged, and this was actually, and this is seen as like a good way to start off. Another important fact that the professionals saw is that there is adaptation and implementation by Arab professionals. And actually, I see the title is wrong. It should be program strengths and not contributions on this title of the slide. But anyway, that Arab professionals are very involved in developing all of the curriculum and all of the different attributes of the program. And also, it's seen as a source of strength that the Ministry of Education is involved. In other words, it's not just something done by a voluntary organization, by an NGO that has a nice idea, or by a specific municipality that might even be collaborating with the NGO, but the Ministry of Education from the very top levels is very much involved. And so, first of all, they can bring support, they can bring funds, they can bring resources. Second of all, the idea is, and this is what they say, is that we want to see how this goes, and we certainly want to take this as something that we can hopefully then move on to the rest of the Arab community. Okay, and now contributions, what we see is that already, even though, as I say, things have really just started, it does seem this buzz and the fact that things are happening in some of the preschools is reinforcing the local commitment to pay attention to preschool education. As this quote says, the municipality invested in education in the locality, but it was almost all in the schools. What makes this program important is its focus on early childhood. So I think this is something you also sometimes confront in the United States, of how to bring the focus onto early childhood. And this is something that apparently is already happening from the very start. And then another thing that seems to be happening is this tripling down effect of having the municipalities where some of their preschools are in the program saying, well, okay, let's somehow, maybe we can make this happen for the preschools that aren't in the program. And you see them also already making adjustments. Okay, so before I finish, I'm actually not bad with time. I also wanted to discuss with you some of the strategic issues that have arisen already from this initial assessment that we see, strategic issues regarding the program and different dilemmas which are coming up, which so often does during the first year of an evaluation. One of them is the clarification of the division of responsibility. So you heard that a lot of people are involved. So there's people from the Ministry of Education, people from the municipality, people from all the different organizations implementing. Then we've got the program staff, the coaches, the trainers, and the preschool teachers and parents. So you've got a lot of people with a lot of goodwill who want to get things done. And the issue here is how to divide things up so people aren't falling over each other, getting annoyed just because someone else is doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing. So in a comprehensive program of this sort, where we're bringing so many people in is a is a goal, is an objective, also have to think of how to clarify things, and not just on the local level, also on the regional level, and even also on the national level. Another issue that comes up is finding the balance between tailoring to local preferences and introducing new modified modes of action. So if before we said like people were happy with the curriculum, bringing in high quality curriculum, and then what happens if the teacher says, yeah, but I really don't want to use that curriculum, okay? So they've developed curriculum for music, and there are teachers who say, I really don't want to spend the time on music, I have other things, okay? And then it's really an issue, and I've seen this in other programs as well, where on the one hand you want to give autonomy to the end users, but you also want to see how your program works. And so this has to be worked out, like when do they insist and when do they not? And this is something that people are struggling with right now. Then there's also a number of issues with respect to parents. So one issue about parents is what do we really expect? Are we talking just about participation in preschool activities, or could we actually be aiming for something more, for also impacting how parents, parenting in the home, for instance, giving out books for parents to read and asking them to read to their children. So that's already not in the preschool, that's at home, and maybe other things even beyond that. So this is something which people are struggling with, because there is a lot of awareness, recognition that parents are very important, and the question is how much do they want to invest in that? And then there are also a number of cultural issues about parents, getting back to how I started my talk on the issue of culture. So we're talking, as I said, about many changing norms. So many of these norms have to do with education, and I have a really nice quote. Yeah. So here, so as one professional said, parents are happy to see that the yard is being renovated, and it's easy to sell this to the parents. But when you teach a child about critical thinking, and the child comes home and starts not to take things for granted, then the parents get angry at him, then there's a gap. So he thinks, this professional, he says, the parents have to be very involved in this program. We're not here to educate the parents, but hopefully through partnership we will be able to at least reduce these gaps between what's happening with the children and the parents. And then other cultural issues are, for instance, should the program only be reaching out to parents? What about the extended family with whom the parents might be living, or especially the grandmother might be the main person taking care of the child? So we're also getting involved with extended families. And then fathers. Okay, so fathers have a very traditional role in the Arab family. So are we going to try to change that, or are we going to stay with that? And so as in many programs which occur all over the world, we often find ourselves in a situation of really having to examine our own norms and think about how we want to deal with them in implementing the program and in moving forward. So these are just some of the questions that have come up at this very early stage of our evaluation, or really just beginning. And with that, I will conclude and hand the microphone, the virtual microphone, over to Tamara.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I will try to keep my comments short, but I was asked by Miriam to kind of comment and reflect upon this this new research that we're very excited and honored to be a part of in Israel, and talk a little bit about you know, the similarities and differences with early childhood quality initiatives in the United States and implications for cross-cultural research. So I will try to keep my comments short and then open it up to questions for folks on the phone and also here in the room. And for those on the phone, I wanted to just let you know that if you have questions or comments, please submit them via the chat box available to you through the webinar. So obviously there are many cultural and early childhood policy differences between the United States and Israel, but I do want to focus and reflect upon some similarities to approaches to early childhood across the two countries, and also opportunities to learn from one another. So There are a lot of similarities, actually. One is that both in the U.S. and in Israel, the early childhood system seems a bit fragmented. There are multiple early childhood systems in both places. So in the U.S., we have child care, which covers both home-based care and center-based care. We have Head Start. We have public pre-kindergarten, even for in some places 3-year-olds as well as 4-year-olds. So we don't have one system here in the United States. They operate under different rules and regulations, and so that can be complicated when you're trying to assure high-quality early care and education for all children in the United States, just as it is a challenge in Israel with its fragmented system. In both places, our quality improvement initiatives are focusing on many of the same issues. So, for instance, meeting standards of quality, starting with basic indicators of quality such as group size and ratio. In individual states here in the United States have regulations for group size and ratio, but we have variation across states in what those requirements are, and it could be the same in other places. We have, across the two countries, the quality initiatives are focused on improving physical environment and addressing health and safety issues, as well as focusing on professional development of the workforce and use of curriculum and child assessments and improving interactions both between adults and children and between parents and teachers. And I'm also excited because of many of you know my interest in implementation science. I was very excited to see that a focus of this particular initiative was building the infrastructure at the local, regional, and state levels for implementing and sustaining quality improvement over time. And I know that this is something that is receiving more and more attention within states and federal agencies interested in early childhood initiatives. I was also struck by the commonalities in how we are thinking about family engagement. Both here in the United States, we're seeing that parent engagement or family engagement means more than just involvement in school, showing up at a parent-teacher conference or volunteering in a classroom. It means engaging parents as children's first teachers and supporting them in their efforts to support their own child's development. Now, many of you are aware that this has been a bedrock of Head Start from its inception, but now with early Head Start child care partnerships and the development of public pre-K and expansion of public pre-K, I believe that this is this emphasis on engaging parents in their child's education, not just seeing it as a one-way street that the parent has to come to the school, is something that's permeating and emphasized more and more in recent years throughout our early childhood systems here in the United States, not just in Head Start. And so I was excited to see that. There are some differences that Miriam noted, and most primarily the amount of varying resources available within the U.S. and within Israel compared to the U.S. for early childhood quality improvement initiatives. But even within states in the United States and regions within the United States, there's varying levels of monetary resources and other resources to support that. I think that one of the places, the opportunities to learn, there's many opportunities that we can learn from each other. One opportunity, an example within the United States that might be of interest to Israel once, if it turns out that the quality initiatives within the Arab sector prove to be something promising that you want to scale up more across all early childhood sectors within Israel, is the model of the quality rating and improvement systems that have been developed within majority of states now in the United States have such systems. And these are systems that are helping to support individual child care providers to improve their level of quality, but it also is used to permit consumers, that is parents, to access information about the quality of programs and to help that consumer, through consumer education and information, compare and help choose programs using a uniform metric of quality of some kind. Now, there is variation across states and communities in how they develop those rating systems, but they're using multiple indicators of quality to put into those metrics. And I think that that might be a useful model to examine for Israel. Another opportunity to learn, when you were mentioning clarifying roles and responsibilities amongst the many people involved in the initiative, I was reminded that within implementation science, there's these structures called or supports called terms of reference or team charters, which actually articulate and clarify roles and responsibilities and help people just be clear with one another about ways of working, and that might be something useful that you can look at for this particular initiative. And I think the other ways, beyond those two things of things that this initiative can learn from examples outside of Israel, I think that we can also learn a lot from the research that you are doing in Israel now on this particular project, and also, I guess, others abroad. There are two topics in particular that really struck me, where I feel we could really learn from you, and that is around the issue of cultural sensitivity and culturally responsive research design. We're working here at Child Trends on strengthening our research operations around cultural sensitivity and racial equity, and I think that the model that you're using, or that you're doing in this research project, is a model for us. One, just as one example, you pointed out the differences within the Arab community in terms of there's variation in terms of who makes up that Arab society, and we need to do the same here in the United States, and not looking at Hispanics as like a monolithic group, but there's variation within that group, there's variation within the Asian population in the United States. So thinking about how do you break those things down further and be really sensitive when you're doing research in those communities, with those communities engaging researchers from that background is very important. And then the other area that I thought was really helpful that we could learn from you is exploring these, what I call spillover effects. So you're doing some work within particular programs, early childhood programs, and other Arab preschools who are not part of this initiative are seeing that that's happening and are looking for ways to improve their quality. And we take that, that ripple effect or spillover effect is something that I think is very important to study and to learn from, because that is one way that initiatives can spread organically within populations. So I'm going to stop there and just thank you again for coming, and tell you again how excited we are to be a part of this, even as well as we are a part of this project. So thank you so much. Toda Rabah. And I'm going to open it up to those in the room, and also parents, if you could help us with those who have questions on the line. Thank you.
I'll kick us off with a broad question. This is Natalia Pane. I'm very interested in the workforce and fascinated, if I understand correctly, that you basically went to universal pre-K and you've got a certified person in every classroom, and you did that basically overnight. So if you could say a little bit more about how you did that.
Well, should I say she didn't do that?
I understand. Generally speaking, how did Israel do that, and what's your assessment of how well it was done, and what were some of the challenges?
Right. So it varies, okay? In some places, well, actually, more so among the Jewish population, the children were mainly already in preschool. They were just, the parents were paying for it privately. But most of the teachers were already certified. We actually have in Israel a fairly large, I think, group. I mean, we don't really lack preschool teachers. It's a popular profession for teachers. So there, the issue was in certifying it, making it come up to standards. Coming in and checking the buildings and all that, and making that happen, and then the teachers becoming certified, joining the Ministry of Education instead of privately. And some people liked it more, and some people liked it less. They didn't have much choice, because the consumers, the parents, preferred to get it for free than to continue paying, because it's quite expensive. Preschool is really quite expensive. I'm trying to think. I mean, like, to have 2 children in preschool is basically it's a salary almost. I mean, it really is expensive. So they had no choice, and they joined, and it was done. In the Arab sector, it was more complicated. So some of it was bringing in private preschool teachers who had been working privately, and then bringing them in into the Ministry of Education. And then there was a lot of I'm missing the word, but the word is people who had been doing other things. For instance, teachers. Actually, in the Arab community, there is an excess of teachers, because it's one of the things a lot of people go and study it. So there was a big campaign for teachers to have a training, a sort of a fairly quick training, and then be sent down to the preschools. It actually had a detrimental impact on the 0 to 3 framework, because now there were many more jobs in the 3-year-old and up frameworks within the Ministry of Education, and those were better jobs, like a lot of vacations, I mean, more so than the daycare. So yeah, so you're right. There were two issues. One, and then in terms of finding the buildings, one is the staff, and the other are the buildings. So in some cases, apartments were rented. I mean, yeah, temporary, because not everything could be built right away. So yeah, I don't know all the details, but it was a huge operation.
Is it voluntary preschool?
Or parents are mandated to send their children compulsory?
It started at 3.
At 3.
Mandatory.
It's mandatory, but it's not enforced.
So actually, that is one of the questions from a Dee Curler on the line asked, from when is early childhood education mandatory? So from age 3. Is that right? But not
enforced.
Not enforced.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would be coming around and looking. Certainly not until age 5, maybe at 4. But
it must have essentially shut down the 3 to 5 market.
The private market. Well, yeah, exactly, right. And they all went into yeah. A few are left. You know, there are a few people very high end for families with money, right? Right. But among the middle class, it shut it down. But the main impact was bringing in so many lower class kids into the preschool. And the hope is that this then affected employment for women. So that was the other part. So it was really done on a poverty, a fight to poverty kind of platform. I mean, thinking yes about the children, but also no less about the ability to leave families this extra income and help women go to work.
We have 2 more questions from Dee Curler. One is, who funds the early childhood centers? Is it the Ministry of Education or the municipality? And the second question is, what other municipal organizations are you working with for your initiative, such as local libraries, museums, or parks, and what organizations are available in the Arab sector?
Okay. So this education is funded totally by the central government, but the municipalities can also add. Okay, so you do see differences between what's happening in poor communities and more wealthy communities. But the basics, the salaries are funded from the government, the buildings are funded by the government, the basic, all of the basic, the basic set of services, all federal government funded. Within the municipalities, so it really depends, but they're like, as responding to the second question, there will often be a community center, there may be a library, there may be other services. I think part of this initiative is to give them new life, to help some of these things grow even more.
I have a question, Jessica Bartlett, and I'm interested in this outcome of school readiness that you had essentially, or school preparedness, and what that means, whether there are differences in kind of the conception there versus the conception here, things like social emotional development, et cetera, and then how does that map onto what Arab families actually want for their children?
Okay, the first question, it's too complicated for me to answer. It's been a big issue. I'm not going to go near it, okay? It's very complicated. For that, I can set you up like an appointment with someone.
We're happy.
Yeah, I mean, of course we needed to kind of figure it out what people are saying, but it's very much being discussed, and that's good. I mean, there's like a real discussion about it. Arab families, I think, really want their kids to do well in school. So, of course, ideas are changing about what that means. But, I mean, we see it so much. Parents really want their kids to do well in school. They recognize that school is the way for children to do well as children and also to move on as adults. So now that these preschools are available and free, there's a very large take-up. It's not an issue at all. Parents are very happy to send their kids.
I'm sorry, I chimed in earlier. Kristen Darling-Churchill, thanks for being here again, Miriam. I wanted to echo what you were saying, Tamara, about what we can learn from your studies around the cultural side of your initiative. And I think the U.S. can learn a lot through this partnership, Child Trends, and broadly if we can help disseminate that information on cultural competence and working with Arab and Muslim families with our growing population. And I think it's a tremendous gap. So that's a comment. My question is about your sample frame for your evaluation aspect. So how are you going about the evaluation? Which schools, how many schools will be studied? What are you going to include besides the class observation?
Okay. So for the children, the program basically, it took 11 communities out of, I'm guessing there might be 100 communities, Arab communities in Israel. It picked 11, which it tried to pick so as to represent the different types of Arab population, because again it sees this as a pilot for ultimately disseminating national policy. So we have some Bedouin, and with some in the middle of the country, and then we have some up north. So we went to those 11 communities, and they're working in 164 preschools. Again, they selected in order to represent what they saw as typical preschools. We actually weren't involved in that. This is very common in Israel that programs get off before they invite the evaluators in, which is a pity, but that's how it is. So in some of the communities, they took all of the preschools, and in others they didn't. They took only some. So in terms of our, we're examining the teachers in all of the program preschools. For the children, we have samples. The sample within the program is a random sample of 4 children in every, 4 children, randomly picked 4 children in every preschool, although we're actually kindergarten. We're looking at the children as the 5-year-olds because we're trying to see where they are at the end of the program before they go into school, although we're doing it with a baseline measurement now and then in years 4 and 5. So we picked 4 children randomly. Then we have a comparison group. The comparison group we picked by matching the cities and preschools within the cities. We did this with administrative data. And then within each of those preschools, we also then picked 4 children randomly.
Could take another question from those online. Heidi Schwartz was curious about if there are any bicultural or bilingual preschool programs in Israel, for example, Hebrew, Arabic, and is that something that parents want for their children or not?
Yeah, so there are some programs. There are some, like in Jerusalem where I live, there's a very large bilingual school, and they're in Haifa, and there are some places around the country. I didn't mention this, there are also cities which are, in which Arabs and Jews do live, not only in separate communities. And it is something which some parents want, but it certainly is not a major development. To date, most people prefer to have their own Arabic language, Muslim or Christian school, and not to go together. I think there's more mixing going into high school, and then going to higher education, it's all totally mixed.
2 more questions. Heidi had another question in general. How long is the preschool day in Israel? And then once we answer that, I have a question from David Murphy.
Right. So it used to be until 1, but now it's actually till 4.
When does it start?
Oh, about 7:30 or 8. So it's supposed to be a day long enough to be able to go to work if you live nearby, which, by the way, is a problem for employment of Arab women because they often live in not so close to the workplaces. They live in more peripheral communities, so they might need extra help from someone else in order to be able to get that done. In other words, get to work and back before the day is over, but it is a fairly long day.
Okay, and then David Murphy asked, you say that preschool teacher is a popular profession in Israel. Presumably then it has a higher social status there than it does here. What accounts for that?
Okay, well, I said it's a higher status. It doesn't necessarily, they don't necessarily make a lot of money. I just want to say.
Money doesn't go with status.
Not always. Well, it's a women's profession. We won't get into that. Why? I think in Israel, among all the different populations, teaching and teachers has status. It is something that, and it's also, there's, I think, a relatively large supply of higher education positions. In other words, it's relatively easier to get in, and there are quite a number of teaching colleges up north. So it's something that would be easier for Arab women to go to than they wouldn't have to actually leave home in order to study some of the other subjects. So I think that's one reason why there's more, but it's not only in the Arab sector, also in Jewish sector. In Israel, we have a lot of preschool teachers. It's considered something people like to do.
Dee Dee Curler had a comment that the YMCA in Jerusalem is bicultural and bilingual with co-teachers. And that was just a comment. So.
And they have a preschool there, right? So there are programs. I mean, I didn't mention them all. Sure, there's quite a number of programs, but it's not the majority, but it's certainly a start. It's certainly a start, and there are programs both at preschool level, school level, also all kinds of clubs and leadership programs. I mean, there are a lot of different initiatives going on. Some of them, the idea is that kids learn together and just go on with their things. Like there's a leadership program where kids are developing science skills, or they're learning science together. And then there are other programs where the kids are actually discussing issues. So there's a number of different things going on. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, I think we've reached our time for the webinar. I thank you all for your participation, and especially to Miriam Navot for joining us and sharing your research with us.
Thank you.
Thank you to those who joined on the line as well. Thank you all.